On Thanksgiving night, crystal clinked and laughter shattered like ice. My grandfather stood, lifting his glass. "To real family," he said, and then slowly pointed straight at me, in front of over 30 relatives. He opened an old wooden box, revealing letters and a family charter none of us had ever seen. When my name was called, the entire table went silent. All I could hear was my own pulse and the live stream view counter starting to climb. My name is Quinn Halbrook. I grew up in Flagstaff, Arizona, where the high desert air is thin and the shadows are sharp. In my family, I was always the self-sufficient one, the quiet planet orbiting just outside the bright, gravitational pull of my younger sister, Marley. I learned early that my accomplishments were personal, folded away like clean laundry, while hers were ticker tape parades. I was the responsible one, the one who could be counted on to just handle it, which really meant I could be counted on to be ignored. This morning, however, was different. I was in Boston, hundreds of miles from that Arizona sun, standing under the focused, artificial warmth of stage lights. I was accepting the Civic Impact Laureate from the Beacon Equity Lab. The room was hushed, respectful. The award, a heavy sculpted piece of crystal, was for an algorithm I had spent 3 grueling years developing. It was a piece of code, but to me, it was a voice. It was a system designed to allocate public health resources equitably, cutting through the thick mud of systemic bias to find the communities that needed help the most, not just the ones that shouted the loudest or had the right connections. The auditorium was filled with the soft rustle of expensive programs and the murmur of anticipation. As the presenter, a woman with a voice like smooth velvet, listed my credentials and the impact of the algorithm. My phone, resting on the lectern, buzzed silently. I glanced down, my heart doing a familiar, stupid little flip-flop of hope. It was a text from my mother. "So sorry, honey. Can't make it. Busy moving Marley into her new condo." It was followed by a string of celebratory emojis, a house, a champagne bottle, a party horn. That felt like tiny, cheerful slaps across the face. I took a breath. I typed back, "It's okay. I understand. Tell her congratulations," and hit send before the presenter called my name. My calm was a practice thing, a smooth, hard lacquer I had perfected over 2 decades of similar disappointments. It was a shield. And now, please welcome this year's Civic Impact Laureate, Quinn Halbrook. The applause rose like a tide, a wave of validation from strangers that washed over me as I stepped forward. I smiled, shook the presenter's hand, and turned to the audience. My eyes instinctively found the seats reserved for my family in the 3rd row, 2 of them, starkly, pointedly empty. A camera operator, panning across the front rows to capture the standing ovation, lingered for just a second too long on that deliberate, unapologetic void. The shot was unintentional, I am sure, or perhaps it was just good storytelling. Either way, it told the truth. My speech was 5 minutes long, 5 minutes to distill 3 years of work, of fighting for funding, of debugging code at 3 a.m, fueled by stale coffee and a stubborn, burning belief that data could be made to serve justice. I talked about the numbers, about how they could be bent to serve power or straightened to serve truth. But the line that went viral, the one that would echo back to me in the most unexpected way, was not about the algorithm. It was the one I added at the end, my eyes drifting back to those empty chairs, the space where my support system was supposed to be. "When no one saves you a seat at the table," I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the silence, "bring a folding chair." The applause was louder this time, more immediate, later, during the reception, as I navigated the clusters of academics and donors. A journalist with sharp eyes and a sharper microphone cornered me by the champagne fountain. "Incredible speech, Ms. Halbrook. Truly inspiring. Your family must be immensely proud. Were they able to be here today to celebrate with you?" I smiled, the practiced calm sliding into place like a sheet of shatterproof glass. "Today is about the work," I deflected smoothly. "It's about the communities we serve and the future we're trying to build at Beacon." I offered her a canned quote about our next quarter's projections and politely excused myself. I did not let the glass crack. I would not give them that. That night, alone in my quiet Boston apartment, the heavy crystal award felt cold and solid in my hands. It was tangible proof, a weighty object that declared I existed, that my work mattered, even if it mattered to no one I shared blood with. I placed it on my desk, right next to a worn, leather-bound journal my grandmother June had given me before she passed. She was the one exception, the one person who had always seen me clearly. My phone rang, splitting the silence of the room. The caller ID was a Wyoming number, one I had not seen light up my screen in years. My heart didn't flip-flop this time. It braced. I answered. "Hello?" "Quinn." The voice was gravelly, powerful, and instantly familiar. Rutherford Hale, my grandfather, a logistics billionaire who lived in self-imposed exile in Jackson Hole, ruling his vast empire from a fortress of glass and timber that overlooked the mountains. "Grandfather," I said, my posture straightening automatically, as if he could see me through the phone. "I saw the video," he said. No preamble, no congratulations. That line about the chair, was that for them? I did not have to ask who them was. It was for anyone who needed to hear it, I replied, keeping my voice even. A dry, rustling chuckle crackled down the line. "Good answer. You have your grandmother's spine. I want you home for Thanksgiving. This Thursday. My jet will be at Logan at 6 a.m. It was not a request. It was a summons. "Grandfather, I have work. The quarter-end reports are due." "The work will be there Friday," he interrupted, his tone final. "I want to hear you talk. In person, not on some internet video." He hung up before I could form another protest. I stood there for a long moment, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. Home. Jackson Hole was not my home. It was his. It was a place of tense holidays, unspoken alliances, and ceilings so high they were designed to make you feel small. It was the place my mother had run from, only to recreate its emotional chill in her own house in Arizona. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text. It was from Marley. The message contained only a link to a gossip blog that had picked up the empty chair story, followed by a simple sentence. "You can stop acting now. We all know you did it for the attention." The old, familiar sting of it, the casual dismissal, the immediate assumption of bad faith. For my entire life, her radiance had required my shadow. My sudden, unexpected visibility was a threat to her narrative. I ignored the text. I looked at the award on my desk, gleaming under the lamplight, and then at the journal beside it, my grandmother's journal. The award represented my arrival. The journal represented the journey. From invisible to present, the path, I realized, had been laid long ago, and I was finally walking it. A new email pinged. The subject line was Flight Itinerary, Hale Logistics, Boston to Jackson Hole, arriving precisely on Thanksgiving Day. A feeling settled deep in my gut. A cold, clear premonition that cut through the exhaustion. This was not a holiday dinner. This was not a family reunion. This was a reckoning, and I was, for the first time in my life, ready to take my seat. My parents, Elaine and Gavin, were people of formal control. They were architects of a life that looked perfect from the curb but felt hollow from the inside. Affection was rationed, and praise was a currency they spent only on the most significant achievements, which, in our family, had a very narrow definition. My father was a man of quiet, unwavering principles, and my mother was a woman of nervous, performative propriety. And then there was Marley, my sister, their little son. She was all bright light and easy charm, a performer who commanded the spotlight so naturally that it seemed gravitationally bound to her. I was the shadow she cast, the quiet, self-sufficient daughter who never made a fuss, who never needed anything. My 10th birthday is the memory that serves as the anchor for this feeling. It was supposed to be my day, a Saturday, but it was also the day of Marley's spring ballet recital, a minor performance at the local community center. The day was entirely swallowed by it. The morning was a whirlwind of pink tulle, bobby pins, and my mother's anxious directives, my father was preoccupied, filming every clumsy plie with the dedication of a documentarian. My own milestone, the turn of a decade, was an afterthought. When the recital was finally over, after the applause and the flowers for Marley, we got home late. My party was a single cupcake with a melting candle. My gift, presented distractedly by my father as he rewound the recital tape, was a thin, spiral-bound notebook. It had a glossy cover emblazoned with the logo of a pharmaceutical sales company, leftover swag from a job fair he had attended. "You like to write, don't you?" he'd said, not looking up from the camera. I took the notebook. The cover was slick and smelled of vinyl. The pages were thin, the blue lines stark. It felt as empty and impersonal as the day had been, but I used it. I used it to catalog the things no one else seemed to notice. The specific, waxy smell of the birthday candle just after it was blown out, the sound of my mother's heels clicking on the hardwood floor when she was stressed, the exact shade of the living room curtains when the afternoon light hit them. I wrote about the suffocating, silent pressure of the house, the feeling of always standing just off stage, in the wings of my own life, waiting for a cue that never came. That cheap promotional notebook became my first real act of defiance. It was a space where I could exist, unseen but recorded. This pattern of non-attendance became my normal. The most glaring example came 3 years later, at the district science fair. I had spent 2 months, working alone in the garage, building a miniature wind turbine from salvaged bicycle parts, PVC pipe, and a small generator I had mail-ordered. It was complex, it was functional, and it was mine. I had charted its energy output, written a 20-page paper on renewable energy grids, and built a display that was, if I say so myself, professional. I was nervous, my stomach tight. As the judges made their rounds, when they announced the winners, my name was called for first prize in the engineering category. I walked up to the podium, my heart hammering against my ribs. I accepted the blue ribbon and the small engraved plaque. As I walked back, I scanned the bleachers, the rows of faces blurred with parental pride. I looked for the specific space where my parents and sister were supposed to be. The chairs were empty, just 2 folded, gray, metal chairs, a void. I learned later they had taken Marley to an impromptu audition for a local commercial. She did not get the part. I stood there by my turbine, the ribbon in my hand, feeling the familiar, cold stillness settle over me. But this time, someone was watching. My grandmother, June Hale, my mother's mother, was there. She had been standing at the back, unnoticed by me. She was nothing like her daughter. June was Rutherford's wife, a woman who had matched his steel with her own quiet, unyielding grace. She walked over, not with pity, but with a look of profound understanding. She touched the blade of my turbine. "You built this," she said. It was a statement, not a question. "Yes," I whispered. She said nothing about my parents. She simply reached into her bag and handed me a package wrapped in plain brown paper. I opened it. It was a journal, but it was nothing like the sales notebook. This one was bound in thick, soft, dark brown leather. The pages were heavy, cream-colored, and unlined. It smelled of cured hide and old-world craftsmanship. She placed her hand over mine on the cover. "When you forget who you are," she said, her voice low and firm. "When they make you forget, you write in this. You write until you hear your own voice again. Not theirs, yours." That journal became my most important possession. It was where I dissected the world, where I worked out my problems, and where I built the foundations of the person I would become. In high school, my family's practicality began to clash with my ambition. I was quiet, but I was not aimless. I excelled in math and literature, 2 disciplines that seemed opposed but felt the same to me. They were both systems of logic, of finding truth. I wrote an essay for my advanced placement English class about the structural inequities of our town's zoning laws. My teacher, Mr. Tanner, a man with tired eyes and a fierce love of language, gave it back to me with a single, large red A on the top. Scrawled beneath it were 3 words: voice volume. He had seen it. He understood that my quietness was not an absence of thought, but a deliberate choice. I did not need to shout. I just needed to be precise. When I started applying to colleges, I aimed far from Arizona. I wanted Boston. I wanted the cold, intellectual rigor of the East Coast, a place where my lineage did not matter, where I was not Marley's quiet sister. My family found this absurd. "Boston," my mother had said, her hands fluttering in agitation. "It's dreadfully expensive. It's not practical. Quinn, your father and I think the community college here is more than adequate. You could live at home." "Marley will need the support," my father added, implying that my role was to be a fixed point for their little son to orbit. They saw my ambition as a rejection, an unrealistic fantasy. They did not offer to help. They did not offer encouragement. So I did it myself. I wrote essays. I filled out forms. I applied for every scholarship I could find. When I received the full academic scholarship, it was not a moment of shared celebration. It was my emancipation. Signed and sealed in a thick envelope, I left for Boston with 2 suitcases and my grandmother's leather journal. At the Beacon Equity Lab, I found my tribe. It was a place filled with people like Mr. Tanner, people who valued voice over volume. They were data scientists, sociologists, and community organizers who believed, as I did, that the world could be made fairer. They were not interested in the flash of celebrity or the noise of social media. They were interested in the quiet, structural work of change. My algorithm was born there, not from a desire for a spotlight, but from a desire to fix a broken system. I learned how to make data speak for the forgotten, how to turn cold numbers into a compelling argument for human equity. My concept of being invisible began to change. For my entire childhood, invisible had been a synonym for forgotten. It was a source of pain, a constant reminder of the empty chairs. But in Boston, I redefined it. Invisibility became a strategy. It was the quiet focus of the programmer, the silent observer in the back of the room, the one who listened while everyone else was talking. I did not need to be seen to know my work had value. I was not backstage in my life anymore. I was building the stage, writing the script, and controlling the lights from the booth. I had proven my value to myself and to the world that mattered to me, and then Rutherford called. After his summons, after Marley's spiteful text, I sat at my desk for a long time. I opened my laptop and searched my old email archives. It took me 10 minutes to find it. An email from my grandmother June, sent shortly after I had arrived in Boston as a terrified, determined freshman. It was short, and I had not understood it at the time. "They will always be loud. Quinn," she had written, "do not try to shout over them. Build something. When you have your voice, when you are certain of what it sounds like, it will be time to come home." I looked at the email, then at the heavy crystal award, then at the summons from my grandfather. It was time. I had my voice, and it was clear. It was documented, and it was now, finally, being heard. His invitation was not just about Thanksgiving. It was the fulfillment of a promise I had made to my grandmother and to myself. I was no longer the girl with the promotional notebook. I was the woman who brought her own chair. Rutherford's private jet, a sleek silver needle, descended through a curtain of thick falling snow. Below us, Jackson Hole was a sea of white and dark pine. Then, Hale Summit Lodge emerged from the landscape. It wasn't a house, it was a compound, a sprawling masterpiece of reclaimed timber and black steel. Perched on a hillside with an arrogant, panoramic view of the Teton Range. It was less a home and more a statement of permanent, unassailable power. The snow, which fell gently in Boston, seemed different here, harder, more deliberate, dusting the jagged peaks like a layer of fine, sharp salt. The jet landed on a private strip, and a heated black SUV was waiting. No one spoke during the 5-minute drive up the winding private road. The silence inside the car was as heavy and insulated as the snowpack outside. When I stepped into the great hall, the shift in atmosphere was instant. The air was warm, thick with the smell of roasting turkey, pine from the enormous Christmas-sized tree, and the faint, acidic tang of old money. My mother, Elaine, rushed forward, not to hug me, but to take my coat, her hands fluttering. "Quinn, you're here. Good. Everyone's already in the dining room. You know how your grandfather is about punctuality." Her smile was brittle, a porcelain veneer over raw nerves. I walked past her, my boots silent on the flagstone floor, and entered the dining room. It was a cavernous space, designed to impress and intimidate. The ceiling was a vault of massive log trusses, and from it hung 3 enormous chandeliers made of intertwined deer antlers, their lights casting a warm, golden, almost theatrical glow on the scene below. A single table, a polished plank of dark wood that seemed to stretch for a mile, dominated the room. It was already crowded with over 30 relatives, aunts, uncles, cousins, and their various spouses, all talking in the loud, confident bray of the wealthy and secure. And then I saw the place cards, white, embossed, calligraphed. My grandfather's table was always meticulously arranged, a strategic map of alliances and obligations. I found my name, Quinn Halbrook. I was seated midway down, between a second cousin I barely knew and no one. To my immediate right was an empty chair, a deliberate, perfectly set, undeniably empty place. It was a test, a provocation, a piece of bait dropped into the shark tank. I had not even sat down before the first whisper reached me. My Aunt Vivian, my mother's sister-in-law, was leaning across the table, her diamonds winking in the antler light, whispering to another cousin. Her voice was just loud enough to carry. "That's her," she murmured. "The one from the video. I heard she staged the whole empty chair thing at that award ceremony, manipulated the media to make her parents look bad. Can you imagine? So ruthless." I ignored her, sliding into my seat, my spine straight. I placed my bag by my feet, my movements calm and measured. The empty chair beside me felt less like a void and more like a spotlight. Before I could even unfold my napkin, a shadow fell over me. Marley. She was wearing a red dress that was impossibly bright against the rustic wood of the room. Her phone held out like an offering. "Quinn, you're finally here," she chirped, her voice a pitch too high. She did not wait for a reply. "Look, my new sponsorship video just dropped, the one for that new energy drink. Burst? It's already hit almost 500,000 views in, 2 hours." She played it, a high-speed, obnoxious montage of her laughing, spinning, and holding the can up to the camera, all set to some thudding, brainless pop song. She stopped the video abruptly and leaned in, her smile widening. "I saw your little speech. By the way, very dramatic. How many views did that get? 50,000? Cute. It's amazing what a little manufactured drama will do for your numbers." "It wasn't about the numbers, Marley," I said, my voice quiet. "Oh, I know," she said, patting my shoulder. "For you, it's about the impact." She pronounced the word as if it were something distasteful, something she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. She sashayed away, her phone already up, filming the centerpiece for her story. I scanned the room for my grandfather. He was at the head of the table, exactly as I remembered him, only more so. The rumors of his failing health were clearly exaggerated. He looked carved from the same granite as the mountains outside. He was 80, maybe more, but his posture was rigid, and his eyes, as they swept the room, were not the cloudy, nostalgic eyes of an old man. They were sharp, assessing, and bright as polished steel. He was watching everyone. He saw Marley's performance, he saw Vivian's whisper, and he saw me arrive. His gaze met mine for a fraction of a second, and he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, before turning to the man who had just entered the room. A new hush fell, this one laced with genuine anxiety. Arlo Dwyer, the family's chief counsel, had just walked in, carrying a worn leather briefcase. Arlo was not a man who came for social calls. He was a man who came to execute wills, broker mergers, and deliver bad news. My Uncle Blevins, a man who masked his greed with bad jokes, called out from down the table. "Good God. Arlo, you're here? What's this? Rutherford? A Thanksgiving feast with a side of a will reading?" A few people laughed nervously. Rutherford Hale did not crack a smile. "Arlo is here as a guest. Blevins, try to enjoy your turkey without calculating its market value." The rebuke was sharp, and it silenced the table. My mother seized the moment to slide into the empty chair beside me, her proximity a cloud of expensive perfume and anxiety. "Quinn," she hissed, her fingers gripping my forearm. "I saw you looking at this chair. Do not say a word about the chairs at your ceremony. Do you hear me?" Vivian is already running her mouth. "Your grandfather doesn't need this drama. We don't need this drama. Just be pleasant. Don't give them anything to talk about. Please." She was not asking me to spare her feelings. She was asking me to participate in the lie, to protect the family's immaculate image, the very image they had never bothered to include me in. I looked at her desperate, pleading eyes, and then I looked at the empty chair. I reached for the small, elegant arrangement of white tulips at the center of our table section, placed there for decoration. I lifted the small crystal vase out of the centerpiece, water and all, and set it down deliberately on the place setting of the empty chair. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "It's not for them," I said to her, my voice clear and low, audible only to her. "It's for whoever decides to show up." She stared at me, her expression caught between anger and confusion, and then she fled, scurrying back to her own seat beside my father. A minute later, as the staff began to pour the wine, my phone buzzed in my lap. It was not a call. It was a text from an unknown, blocked number. 8 words. "Don't let them leave a hot mic tonight." I froze. My blood went cold. A sudden shock that cut through the warmth of the room. I read it again. Hot mic. This was not a general warning. This was specific, technical. This was about a performance. I looked around the room, at Marley, who was still filming everything, at my cousins, who were deep in conversation, at Arlo Dwyer, who was speaking quietly with my grandfather, and I noticed, for the first time, a small, discreet audio speaker on a tripod in the corner, and a small mixing board set up on a side table, currently unmanned. Someone was planning to make a speech. Someone was planning to record it. And someone in this room knew the schedule, knew the seating chart, and knew that I was the target. Someone was warning me. The storm had not just been signaled. It was already here, circling the lodge, and I was standing at its absolute, silent center. The text message was a piece of shrapnel, lodging itself in my mind. Don't let them leave a hot mic. This was not a warning about a social gaffe. It was technical, precise, and it implied a conspiracy. My instincts, honed not in family drawing rooms, but in data labs, took over. I needed to investigate the hardware. I slipped away from the table, murmuring an excuse about the powder room. The whispers from my Aunt Vivian and her cluster died down as I left, only to flare up again, I was sure. As soon as my back was turned, I bypassed the guest bathroom, instead taking a route that led me toward the service corridor, pretending to be searching for a different room. This path took me right past the audio-visual setup. It was exactly as the text had implied. A small mixing board sat on a linen-draped table. In 2 corners of the grand dining hall, discreet speakers stood on tripods. They were not part of the lodge's integrated, invisible sound system. These were rentals. I moved closer, as if admiring a nearby painting. A fresh vinyl sticker, not yet worn, clung to the base of one speaker. Y-Hi AV. A local events company, this entire setup had been brought in just for today. My grandfather, a man of meticulous control, would never use a third-party rental for a simple family dinner unless it served a specific, temporary purpose, or unless someone else had arranged it. As I looped back toward the dining room, I heard voices from a small alcove near the coat check, where a large black equipment trunk sat open. "Are you sure it's patched in?" I wanted to override everything else. It was Marley. her voice stripped of its usual airy sweetness, replaced by a low, conspiratorial hiss. "Yes, Marley, I told you," a nervous male voice replied. I recognized it as our younger cousin, Derek, a tech-savvy kid who was always desperate for Marley's approval. "When he starts the toast, I'll have your audio file queued up. The mic at her seat will be live, so we'll get her reaction. It's routed to the main speakers." "Good," Marley said. "Just be ready. Wait until he gets to the part about real family. That's the cue." A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. They were planning to hijack the toast. They were going to use my grandfather's own words as a trigger to publicly humiliate me, likely with some edited audio about the empty chair drama, and they were planning to amplify my reaction for the entire room to hear. I needed to know the night's full agenda. I ducked into the service hallway and pushed through the swinging door into the massive kitchen. It was a blast of heat, steam, and controlled chaos. The head chef, Henri, was inspecting a row of plated appetizers. Arlo Dwyer, the family lawyer, was standing near the door with a glass of seltzer, looking strangely out of place among the copper pots. "Mr. Dwyer," Henri was saying, wiping his hands on his apron. "Just to confirm the timing, the declaration comes after the main course, before dessert?" "No, Henri," Arlo corrected him, his voice clipped and precise. "Let them finish the meal entirely, after dessert, with the coffee. That's when Mr. Hale will make his declaration. We want everyone settled." Declaration, not a toast, not a speech, a legal, formal declaration. This night was segmented. Marley and Derek were planning their ambush for the opening toast, but the main event, the one involving the lawyer, was scheduled for the end. I was caught between two fronts. I retreated from the kitchen, my mind racing. I needed a safety line, an external failsafe. I found a quiet corridor and pulled out my phone. I texted Sarah, my sharpest colleague at Beacon, the one who managed our data security. "Sarah, unusual request. I'm at a family event. Things are volatile. I'm setting a digital tripwire. If you do not receive a text from me with the code Alpine Green in exactly 30 minutes, I want you to call this number." I typed in my grandfather's private line. "Tell the person who answers, Quinn has triggered a data security protocol. That's it. Please confirm." My phone buzzed almost instantly. "Confirmed. 30-minute timer started. Stay safe. Quinn?" I pocketed the phone, a small measure of control restored. I had 30 minutes. I walked back into the dining room. The appetizers were being cleared. My grandfather's eyes found me as I moved toward my seat. He had seen me leave, seen me investigating the AV equipment, seen me talking to no one in the hallway. He knew I was not just a passive guest. As I passed the head of the table, he raised his hand slightly, a gesture for me to pause. "Quinn," his voice was low, "for my ears only." I stopped. "Grandfather." He looked at me, his gaze unblinking, assessing. "Your grandmother loved the wine cellar," he said, an apparent non sequitur. "She said it was the only quiet place in this house." He reached into his vest pocket and, under the cover of the table, pressed something small, cold, and metal into my hand. A small, ornate brass key. "The collection is extensive. You should see it, but it holds other things too." He was giving me an order, he was giving me an escape route, and he was giving me a clue. I closed my hand around the key. "Thank you. I think I will." I didn't go back to my seat. I nodded to him once and walked to the heavy, iron-strapped door at the far end of the room that led to the cellars. The air grew cold as I descended the stone steps. The cellar was vast, a labyrinth of arched stone and perfectly angled racks holding thousands of bottles. It smelled of damp earth, cork, and time. But I wasn't looking for wine. I walked to the very back, to a section Rutherford had always called his personal library. There, set into the wall, was a small, heavy wooden door that looked more like a safe. The key fit. The room inside was not a cellar, it was an archive, small, dry, and lit by a single desk lamp. It was filled with filing cabinets, map drawers, and on the desk, a single mahogany box. It was beautifully made, and on the lid, inlaid in simple brass, were the initials J.H. My grandmother's. My fingers trembled as I lifted the lid. It wasn't locked. Inside, it smelled of old paper and lavender. It was full, letters tied with a ribbon, old photographs, and underneath it all, a document bound in heavy, dark blue leather. The Hale Family Charter, the cover read. Draft, private. I opened it. It was my grandmother's elegant handwriting and my grandfather's sharp, impatient scrawl in the margins. It was a framework, a constitution for the family's future. I scanned the pages, my heart quickening. It spoke of legacy not as wealth, but as responsibility. And then I found the clause, circled in red ink by my grandmother. Heir apparent, the primary stewardship of the Hale Foundation, and associated voting shares shall not be determined by primogeniture, but by merit. The chosen heir must be a proven creator of public value, demonstrating an ability to build systems of equity and access for those without. This was his metric, not Marley's social media views, not my parents' careful conformity. It was my algorithm. It was my life's work, described in his language. At the very bottom of the box was a single thick envelope, sealed with wax. In my grandmother's hand, it read, Quinn, when you are ready. I broke the seal. The letter inside was short. My dearest girl, it began. If you are reading this, he has finally called you home. You must understand him. He was an orphan, a boy with nothing, and he despises those who have everything and value nothing. He hates a bribe. He hates unearned praise. He only respects one thing, showing up on the hard days. He has been watching you. Quinn, he saw you at your science fair when your parents were not there. He funded your scholarship anonymously. He is testing you tonight. But know this, he is testing you because you are the only one he thinks might be able to pass. My breath hitched. He had been there. He had been my invisible benefactor all along. The pieces slammed together. The empty chair at the award ceremony was not the insult my mother saw. To him, it was a symbol of my independence, my showing up for myself. My data scientist brain kicked in. This was intelligence. This was leverage. I took out my phone. My hands were perfectly steady now. I placed the charter on the desk. Click, I photographed every page. Click, I photographed the letter. Click, I photographed the old picture of myself with the turbine that I found tucked beneath the charter. I compiled the images into a secure file. I sent one copy to my private email. I sent a second copy to the Beacon Labs legal counsel, a woman who specialized in hostile corporate takeovers. My second safety line was now in place. I checked my phone. 28 minutes had passed. I sent the text to Sarah. Alpine Green. I placed every document, every photograph, back into the box, exactly as I had found it. I closed the lid. I walked out of the archive, locking the door behind me. I walked up the cold stone steps, the key heavy in my pocket. When I re-entered the dining room, the main course, the turkey, was just being served. The room was loud with conversation. I slid back into my seat, next to the empty chair and its vase of white tulips. My mother shot me a look of pure venom. "Where have you been?" she hissed. I calmly unfolded my napkin and placed it on my lap. "Just exploring," I said, my voice even. I looked up and met my grandfather's gaze from across the room. He nodded. Just once. He knew. I understood everything. This was not a Thanksgiving dinner. It was an inheritance. And it was not being given. It was being earned. The turkey was carved. The plates were full. And the performance began. My mother, Elaine, rose from her seat, tapping her water glass with a spoon. Her smile was a mask of festive cheer, stretched tight over her nerves. "If I could have everyone's attention," she began, her voice resonating slightly, amplified by the speakers I now knew were part of a trap. "Welcome, everyone. It's so wonderful. Just wonderful. to have the entire family united under one roof. In times like these, unity is what matters most. It's our foundation. As she spoke, the large, dark screen at the end of the room flickered to life. A slideshow began. I thought we'd just share a few highlights from the past year, my mother narrated. The first picture was Marley, front and center, at a charity gala. The next was Marley, laughing on a sailboat. Then, Marley, accepting a small local Influencer of the Year award. My father, Gavin, appeared, but only in the background of a shot of Marley cutting the ribbon on her new condo. My mother was there, too, beaming proudly at Marley. It was not a family album. It was a portfolio, a shrine to their chosen son, curated to erase any other celestial body. Out of perhaps 40 photos, I appeared exactly once, a blurry figure in the background of a group shot from last Christmas, partially obscured by a decorative poinsettia. My award, my work, my entire existence in Boston. It was not an omission. It was a deliberate, tactical erasure. When the slideshow finished with a final professionally lit headshot of Marley, my mother raised her glass, to family, and to a wonderful year of achievements. As the polite applause died down, the attack began, not as a direct assault, but as a series of flanking maneuvers. My Aunt Vivian leaned forward, her voice dripping with insincere curiosity. "Quinn, darling," she cooed, "we've all been reading about your big award, how exciting, and all that drama with the empty chairs. You must tell us, was that planned? It was just so perfectly dramatic for the cameras." Several phones, which had been recording Marley's slideshow, now turned toward me. The small red record lights gleamed on their dark screens. I was illuminated, a specimen under a microscope. I gave a speech about my work. "Vivian," I said, my voice level. "The seating was just seating. But surely you knew it would look bad for your parents," another cousin chimed in. "To just leave them hanging like that, in front of all those important people. It felt so pointed." Before I could answer, Marley leaned across the table, her smile a perfect, sweet-toothed blade. "That's what I don't get. Quinn, all your work is for equity for total strangers, right? But what about your family? Do you just favor strangers over your own blood? Is that part of the algorithm?" The question was designed to paint me as cold, unnatural, a traitor to the sacred code of family. I could feel my mother's glare from across the table, a silent plea for me to be pleasant, to absorb the blow. I turned my head slowly and met Marley's gaze. "Equity doesn't differentiate between family and strangers. Marley," I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the sudden lull. "It just differentiates between need and access. It's a principle." "Oh, a principle," Marley scoffed, rolling her eyes for her audience. "So dramatic." "That's enough," my father's voice, not loud, but heavy, cut through the tension. He was looking at me, his expression one of deep disappointment, as if I were the one who had misbehaved. "Quinn, this is a Thanksgiving dinner, not one of your campus debate forums. Let's not turn this into a political event." He had done it again. Just like when I was a child, he had silenced me, the victim, to appease the aggressor and restore a false, fragile peace. He had chosen, once again, to manage my reaction rather than her attack. "Of course, Dad," I said, the words tasting like ash. "You're right, this is a dinner." Across the vast expanse of the table, I saw my grandfather, Rutherford. He had been watching the entire exchange, his face impassive. He had eaten nothing. He just watched, his steel-gray eyes moving from speaker to speaker, cataloging every word, every flinch. He raised his hand and slowly, deliberately, tapped his crystal glass 3 times with his fingernail. Ting, ting, ting. It was a signal I remembered from childhood, the one he used to summon a silent veto, to pause the game. But he did not raise his glass. He did not speak. He just held his hand there for a long, agonizing moment, letting the silence stretch, before dropping it back to the table. He was not intervening. He was observing. He was letting the test run. In that extended silence, a sudden, high-pitched screech of feedback ripped through the room, making everyone wince. From the side table, Derek, my cousin, fumbled with the audio mixer, his face flushing bright red. Sorry, he mumbled. Just testing the levels for the toasts. I saw Marley, out of the corner of my eye, give him a sharp, subtle cut-it motion with her hand. The trap was set. They were just waiting for the cue. The conversation splintered back into smaller, safer groups, but the blood was in the water. Aunt Vivian took it as her cue to launch the next wave. She turned to the cousin beside her, but pitched her voice for the entire section of the table to hear. Of course, the real question is where all that public equity money is really going, she said, taking a delicate sip of her wine. I heard from a friend at a bank in Boston that these nonprofits are just cash funnels for personal branding. They say she's using the lab's funds to promote herself, all that press. It doesn't just happen for free. It's a PR campaign disguised as charity. This was the real planned assault. This was not a social slight. It was an attack on my integrity, on my life's work. This was the narrative they had built for me. Manipulative, cold, and now corrupt. My mother looked horrified, but said nothing. My father stared at his plate. Marley watched me, her eyes bright with undisguised, hungry anticipation. I did not raise my voice. I did not protest. I simply set down my fork, picked up my phone, and unlocked it. That's a serious allegation, Vivian, I said, my voice calm. I tapped the screen, opening a file I had prepared. I'm so glad you brought it up. I find that data is always the best way to clear up a misunderstanding. I turned my phone's screen toward her. This is the Beacon Labs transparency dashboard. We make it public, but this is an offline copy I keep for presentations. Here, I said, tapping, is our complete, itemized budget for the last fiscal year. And here, another tap, is the audit trail for the algorithm's deployment in New Mexico, including every invoice, every vendor payment, and every travel expense, all signed off by our independent board. I angled the screen so the others, their phones still pointed at me, could see. You'll note, I continued, my voice the same even, informative tone I used with donors, that our marketing and PR budget is less than 1%, and it's allocated entirely for community outreach pamphlets in rural clinics, not for personal branding. I held the phone up, the brightly lit pie charts and spreadsheets shining in the dim, antler-lit room. I invite any of you to look at it. The data is all right here. Please, check my work. A thick, embarrassed silence fell over the table. Vivian's face had gone pale. Her smile frozen. Marley's expression had hardened. Her victory spoiled. Even my father looked up. A flicker of something unreadable. Surprise? Respect? In his eyes. I had not defended myself. I had presented evidence. I had met their volume with my voice, just as Mr. Tanner had taught me. No one moved. No one spoke. The rain had not yet begun to fall, but the air was so heavy with ozone and barometric pressure that you could taste it. The storm was no longer gathering. It was here. It was directly overhead, and we were all just waiting for the first, deafening crack of thunder. The air, thick with my unanswered challenge, did not have time to settle. The grand, gleaming domed lids were lifted from the silver platters, revealing the perfectly browned turkeys. It was the centerpiece of the meal, the symbol of the holiday, the moment of engineered unity. And it was the cue. Excuse me, a voice cut through the murmurs of appreciation for the food. It was Marley. She was standing, but not in a way that suggested a toast. She was energized, her eyes bright and feverish. She had moved to the side table and picked up the wireless microphone, gripping it like a performer. While everyone is here, and before we all get too sleepy, she said, her voice booming artificially through the Y-Hi AV speakers, I just wanted to share something. She looked directly at me, a smile of pure, predatory confidence on her face. This was it. The hot mic. The ambush. I could feel the tiny microphone near my plate, the one I was supposed to believe was off, waiting to capture my gasp, my anger. I did not move. I simply watched her. We've all heard Quinn's version of events, she continued, pacing a little, playing to the room. We've heard about her work and her principles and her empty chairs. The sneer in her voice was palpable. I just wanted to offer a little context, a different perspective. Derek? Derek, huddled over the mixing board, his face pale and sweaty, nodded nervously. He hit a key. The large television screen at the end of the room lit up, but it was not the slick, edited video Marley was expecting. The image was grainy, black and white, stamped with a time code from that very afternoon. 4:13 p.m. The angle was from a high corner. It showed the interior of the main garage. It showed Derek, standing beside my grandfather's black SUV. He was talking to a man in a plain baseball cap and a heavy jacket, his back to the camera. The man was a stranger. I had never seen him before. "You're sure this is all of it?" the stranger's voice said, muffled but clear. "Yes," Derek replied, his own voice shaky. "I'll do exactly what she said. I'll play her file right when the old man starts his toast, and I'll make sure Quinn's mic is live." "Good," the stranger said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick white envelope. He handed it to Derek. "Here's the other 2,000. She wants you to wipe the file from your laptop the second it's done." Derek took the envelope, fanned the cash quickly, and shoved it into his pocket. The room was silent. This was not the video anyone was expecting. I could see Aunt Vivian, her face slack with confusion. Marley's smile was gone, replaced by a mask of stunned horror. "Derek!" she shrieked. "What is this? Stop it!" Derek, his hands shaking violently, hammered at the keyboard. The screen went black. The room was plunged back into the antler light, the silence deafening. Marley forced a high, brittle laugh. "Oh my God! Derek, you are such an idiot. That was from a short film we're shooting. A class project. Right, Derek? Just testing the sound system. Everyone, so sorry." Derek, who was now the color of spoiled milk, just nodded, not looking at anyone, his eyes fixed on the laptop as if it were a bomb. "A short film," a voice said. It was my grandfather. He had not moved from the head of the table. His voice was perfectly calm, almost conversational. It seemed quite realistic. "By all means. Derek, continue testing. But please, let's try to play the right file." "Grandfather, it's really nothing," Marley tried, her voice losing its forced levity. "It's just a silly—" "Arlo," Rutherford said, cutting her off cold. He turned his gaze to the family lawyer, who was sitting, untouched plate before him, watching. "I believe you have the correct file, the one from the master security feed, not the one from our budding filmmakers collection." Arlo Dwyer stood up. He was not a man built for theatrics, which made his actions all the more devastating. He was precise, methodical, like a surgeon. He walked to the AV table, pulling a small, silver USB drive from his suit's inner pocket. Derek actually recoiled from the table as Arlo approached. "Excuse me," Arlo said curtly. He unplugged Derek's laptop and inserted his own drive into the system's controller. He did not touch the mixing board. He used his own small, encrypted tablet. The screen lit up again. This time, the image was in high definition, clear as day. It was the feed from the security camera in the corner of the dining room, the one I had clocked earlier. The timestamp was from just 2 hours ago. The image showed Marley, Derek, and Aunt Vivian huddled near the very AV table Arlo now commanded. Their voices, captured by the room's permanent, high-fidelity security microphones, were sharp and clear. "You have to cut it perfectly," Marley's voice on the recording said. She was animated, her hands flying. "Take the clip of her saying, 'Bring a folding chair,' and lay it over the audio I got from Mom last week, the one where she's crying about how ungrateful Quinn is. It's devastating. And the mic? Vivian's voice asked. Are you sure the one at her plate is live? Derek patched it, Marley said. It's routed only to the recorder, not the main speakers, until I give the cue. We'll capture her reaction when she hears Mom's voice. Then, after Grandfather gives his real family toast, I'll stand up, and I'll play that audio for the whole room. I'll expose her. I'll show him what his precious laureate really is. And I'll bring up the financial angle. Vivian's recorded voice added, the misusing funds rumor will box her in. By the time dessert is served, she'll be ruined. The video feed ended. Arlo clicked a button, and the screen went black. No one moved. No one breathed. The sound of 30 people, frozen in shock, was a vacuum, pulling all the warmth from the room. Then, my mother, Elaine, shot to her feet, her chair scraping violently against the floor. No, she cried out, her voice cracking. That's a lie. That's edited. It's not real. Marley, tell them. Tell them you would never. Gavin, do something. My father's face was a pale, sickly gray. He looked older than my grandfather. He did not look at my mother. He did not look at the screen. He looked at his untouched plate. He reached up, his hand trembling, and grabbed my mother's wrist. He did not yank her, but pulled with a terrible, undeniable force until she collapsed back into her chair. Elaine, he whispered, his voice hoarse. Stop. Just stop. All eyes turned to Marley. She was trapped. The spotlight she craved now an interrogation lamp. Her face was red. Her eyes narrowed. The sweet, charming facade completely incinerated. This was the real Marley, the one I had grown up with. So what? She finally spat, her voice shrill and ugly. So what if I did? She deserves it. She's the one who started this. She came here with her smug little speech and her stupid award, acting like she's better than all of us. She's the one who embarrassed this family. She let those cameras film those empty chairs. She made us look like the villains. I was balancing the media. I was doing what none of you had the guts to do. I was defending our family from her. She was panting, her chest heaving, her finger pointing at me. Rutherford watched her, his expression unchanged. When she finally ran out of breath, he spoke. His voice, still calm, was amplified by the system Arlo now controlled. Media, he said, tasting the word. It's a curious thing, in my long life, Marley. I have found that the person who fears the truth most is always the one who talks about the media the most. The truth does not require balancing. It simply is. He turned his steel-bright eyes to me. The entire room, a jury of my hostile peers, turned with him. They were waiting. They were waiting for my rage, my tears, my victory speech. They were waiting for me to tear my sister apart. I looked at Marley, who was trembling, not with fear, but with pure, unadulterated rage. I looked at my mother, who was sobbing into her linen napkin. I looked at my father, a man so broken by the exposure he could not even lift his head. I felt no triumph, just a vast, cold, empty exhaustion. This was not a win. This was just a confirmation of everything I already knew. I did not raise my voice. I did not use the microphone. I just spoke into the silence, my voice clear. I only have one question. Marley? She looked up, her eyes glaring. You say you did this to defend the family, I said, my voice as steady as my pulse. But in your entire life, have you ever, even once, shown up for me when it was hard? When I won the district science fair and no one was in the audience? When I moved to Boston with 2 suitcases and no help? When I was struggling? Have you ever, once, just shown up without a camera? The question landed on the white tablecloth with the force of a physical object. Marley opened her mouth. A sound, half strangled, came out, but no words. There were no words. Her entire defense was built on a foundation of family loyalty that she herself had never, not once, contributed to. She had no answer. Into that terrible, Stretched thin silence. A new sound came. A young server, his face white with terror, was attempting to refill my father's water glass. His hand was shaking so badly that he knocked over the small, silver salt cellar. A spray of white crystals scattered across the dark, polished wood, stark and vivid. A server spilled the salt, an omen. The contract was broken. The page was turning. The spilled salt lay like a field of snow on the dark wood, a tiny, perfect catastrophe. In the silence, the young server looked as if he was about to be sick. My father did not move. My mother's sobs were muffled in her napkin. Rutherford Hale's voice cut through the paralysis. He did not look at the server, nor at the spilled salt. "Arlo," he commanded. "Bring it in." The lawyer, who had been watching the scene with the detached interest of an auditor, stood. He exited the dining room through the main doors. The 30 relatives whispered, a sound like dry leaves skittering. "What now? What it? Is he finally doing it?" Arlo returned. He was holding the mahogany box, the one from the cellar, the one with the brass initials, J.H. He placed it on the table in front of my grandfather. Rutherford laid his hands on the lid, a gesture that was both proprietary and tender. "Elaine," he said, his voice quiet, drawing my mother's tear-stained face up from her napkin. "You were very concerned about Quinn's empty chairs. You called it a humiliation, a manipulation." "It was," my mother whispered, a final, ragged breath of her old narrative. "It was a mirror," Rutherford stated. He lifted the lid. He did not, at first, retrieve the leather-bound charter. He took out a single, folded sheet of cream-colored stationery, the letter I had read in the archive. "Your mother," he said to Elaine, "was a woman of terrifying clarity. She left this, for this moment." He unfolded the paper and began to read, his voice filling the room, amplified by the audio system Arlo now controlled. "My dearest Rutherford," he read, "when the time comes to call Quinn home, they will not understand her. They will see her silence as weakness and her strength as aggression. They will measure her by the noise they make, not by the work she does." He paused, and his eyes flicked to Marley. "And about the empty chairs," he continued. "They will blame her for those, too. But you and I know the truth." He looked up from the page, his gaze holding every person at that table accountable. "An empty chair," he quoted, "is not a betrayal. It is a space waiting for loyalty. The chair is for the one who shows up, not the one who shows up late, and not the one who only shows up for the photograph." My mother let out a small, wounded sound. Rutherford reached back into the box. He pulled out a photograph, a simple 5x7 print, its colors slightly faded. He did not hand it to my mother. He slid it across the table to my father. Gavin Halbrook, a man frozen in his own failure, picked it up. His hands trembled. I knew the image instantly. It was me, at 12 years old, rain plastering my hair to my face, standing in the echoing, near-empty gymnasium at the district science fair. I was holding my first-place ribbon for the wind turbine. I was looking at the camera, my expression not one of joy, but of stubborn, exhausted persistence. "I took that," Rutherford said quietly. The confession hung in the air. My father's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "I flew to Flagstaff for that fair," Rutherford continued, his voice a low, dissecting monotone. "I stood in the back, behind the folding chairs. I watched your daughter, Gavin, stand by her project for 3 hours, explaining atmospheric pressure and gear ratios to every judge who walked by. She never sat down. She never looked for you." He let the silence build. "You and Elaine were in Phoenix, an audition for a regional car dealership commercial. Marley, as I recall, did not get the part." My father dropped the photograph as if it had burned him. "I watched her," Rutherford said, "when she applied to colleges. I saw her applications. I saw the tuition fees you told her were impractical and unrealistic. So I funded the scholarship, the anonymous one, the Alumni Endowment for Merit. It was my endowment. It was my merit." The room was a tomb. Aunt Vivian's mouth was open. My mother was staring at her father, as if seeing him for the first time. And I watched her in Boston, 2 years ago, during the nor'easter that shut the city down for a week, the one that knocked out power to half of Dorchester. He looked at my parents again. You were skiing in Aspen. Marley had a new sponsorship for a skiwear brand. But Quinn was at the Pine Street shelter. My Boston office keeps tabs on community emergencies. Their report said a young woman from the Beacon Lab had shown up, unasked, and spent 72 hours rebuilding their intake database and logistics system to get blankets and food distributed. She wasn't posting about it. She wasn't raising awareness. She was just there, in the storm. My mother finally broke. "Dad, why?" she choked out. "Why didn't you tell us? If you saw all this, why did you let us? Why did you never say anything?" Rutherford looked at his daughter, and for a second, his steel expression cracked, revealing a profound, ancient sadness. "Because, Elaine, you and Gavin only know how to listen to applause. You are deafened by the spotlight. If I had told you Quinn was worthy, you would have argued. If I had told you she was smart, you would have compared her, by letting you ignore her. I gave her the only thing she needed to become herself. I protected her from your noise. I gave her the silence she needed to build her own voice." He turned back to the box. He lifted out the heavy, dark blue leather document, the Hale family charter. "Which brings us to this," he said, placing it on the table. "Your grandmother's real legacy, the new law of this family." Arlo Dwyer stood, his role shifting from AV technician to executor. He opened the document. "Mr. Hale is referring," the lawyer said, his voice flat and official, "to the governing terms of the Hale Foundation and the controlling shares of Hale Logistics." The whispers stopped. This was it. "The charter states," Arlo read, "that the criteria for the primary heir, the individual who will assume stewardship of the Foundation's controlling vote, will no longer be determined by primogeniture or seniority." He looked up, his gaze sweeping the pale faces of the uncles and aunts. "It will be based, and I quote, on a proven history of selfless action and the quantifiable creation of public value. It is based," Arlo summarized, "on the act of showing up." He turned the page. "This is activated by Article 4, the Real Family Clause. This clause grants immediate and superseding voting rights over the family's philanthropic and capital funds to any member who meets the criteria, as judged solely by the founder, Rutherford Hale." Marley, who had been a statue of simmering rage, finally detonated. "This is insane," she screamed, leaping to her feet. "You're disowning us? You're giving everything to her?" She was hysterical, pointing at me. "I do charity. I do. I am the spokesperson for the Kids with Kicks Foundation. I hosted the gala. It raised $200,000. I have the videos. I have the metrics." She was desperate, listing her public resume, validating her existence with view counts and dollar amounts. Rutherford did not raise his voice. He simply looked at her, his gaze withering, and asked the question that had silenced her once before. "Marley, did you show up?" "Yes," she shrieked. "Without a camera?" he asked. "When it was cold? When no one was keeping score? When it was just work?" The question hit her like a physical blow. The hysteria vanished, replaced by a hollow, desperate vacuum. She had no answer. She crumpled back into her chair, her defiance completely incinerated. The scene was unbearable. My mother's quiet weeping, my father's rigid, empty stare, Marley's ragged, defeated breaths. This was not a victory. It was a demolition. "Grandfather," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the misery. He turned to me, his expression unreadable, waiting. "This is enough," I said. "This isn't a family dinner. It's a trial, and I don't want to be the executioner." I looked at my parents, at my sister. They were not villains. They were just broken, empty. "Please," I said to him, "let's just stop. Let's just raise a glass and try to find a way to be peaceful." I was offering him an off-ramp. I was offering them all amnesty. Rutherford Hale looked at me for a long, hard moment. I saw the test in his eyes. Was I strong enough to win? Or was I still the girl who yielded just to keep the peace? He shook his head, a single, slow, undeniable gesture. Not yet, Quinn. His voice was low, but it held the entire room, the entire mountain, captive. The truth is not a weapon to be put away just because it makes people uncomfortable. We are not here for peace. We are here for truth. He looked at my parents and my sister. And we, he said, need a silence long enough to actually hear it arrive. The silence my grandfather commanded was not an empty one. It was heavy, weighted, a physical presence in the room. It was the sound of 3 decades of unspoken truths, of willful ignorance, of convenient narratives finally, suffocatingly, collapsing. The air crackled. This was the silence long enough to hear the truth arrive, and it was agonizing. It was my father who broke first. He could not bear it. He was a man of principles, and he had just watched his own unravel. He slowly, with the aching stiffness of an old man, pushed his chair back. He stood. He did not look at my grandfather, not at my mother. He looked at me, and his eyes were not angry. They were defeated. She was always, he said, his voice raspy, unfamiliar. So, capable. When she was 10, she balanced her own checkbook. When she was 12, she diagnosed the problem with the furnace before the repairman arrived. When she was 16, He stopped, swallowing, his hand gripping the back of his chair. He corrected himself. A painful, crucial shift. I was afraid that if I acknowledged her strength, if I applauded it, she would just leave. She was already so far beyond us, beyond me. He looked at his hands. Marley needed us. She needed me. She was always right there, needing something, a ride, an approval, a check. And Quinn never needed a thing. So I was silent, he whispered, the admission tearing from him. I thought my silence was respect for her independence, but it was not. It was cowardice. I was afraid of losing the one child who already seemed to belong to the rest of the world, and in my silence, I lost her anyway. I abandoned my post. I accept responsibility for that, for all of it. He sank back into his chair, a man hollowed out, the rigid structure of his denial gone, leaving nothing behind. His confession broke the dam. My mother, who had been weeping silently, now sobbed, a raw, ugly sound that had nothing to do with her performance. I thought she was fragile, she cried, looking at Marley. But speaking to me, I thought Marley was the one made of glass. She felt everything so loudly. And you, Quinn, you never broke. You never cried. You just handled it. Her eyes, red and swollen, met mine. So I made you the wall, she wept. I made you the wall for all of us to lean on. I kept leaning. I never, ever stopped to think that the wall was human, that it might be tired. I am so sorry. Quinn, I made you the wall, and I forgot you were my daughter. It was all there. The truth, the raw, pathetic, human truth of their failure. They had not been monsters. They had been weak and short-sighted and selfish. They had been, in the end, just people. I looked at them. The anger I had braced for was not there. The satisfaction I might have dreamed of was absent. I just felt a deep, profound sadness and a distance, a necessary clinical distance. I hear you, I said, and my voice was calm. It was the calmest voice in the room. I appreciate the words, but I am not a judge. I did not come here for a trial. I came here for a dinner. I looked at my mother, then my father. I just want to have a conversation without all of this, without the accusations or the performances. But I was selfish. The voice was tiny, a mouse in a hurricane. It was so quiet. I almost thought I had imagined it. It came from Marley. She was not looking at me. She was staring at the spilled salt on the table. Her face was pale, scrubbed clean of its rage and its makeup. She looked, for the first time in her life, like a child. I wasn't defending the family," she whispered, the words barely audible. I saw you. I saw you on that stage. I saw the way those people looked at you. The way he looks at you." She glanced at our grandfather. "You were always so strong. You did everything. You never needed anyone. You just left. And I hated you for it. I hated you because you were strong and you didn't need us. And I was selfish. I just wanted to pull you down. I wanted you to be small, like me." It was the most honest thing I had ever heard her say. The confessions, all three, lay bare on the table, exposed and trembling. The room had become a vacuum. Arlo Dwyer stood, his clinical precision a welcome antidote to the raw emotion. "If I may," he said, addressing the table, "this is not, as Mr. Blevins joked, a reading of a will. No one is being disinherited tonight, Mrs. Halbrook." He nodded at my mother. "Mr. Hale is not taking anything away from anyone." He paused, letting the fear in the room subside, before replacing it with a new, colder one. "He is, however, activating the family charter. The real family clause is not about punishing the unworthy. It is about empowering the proven. It is about shifting the family's assets and control from a structure of entitlement based on blood to a structure of stewardship based on behavior. Tonight was simply the verification of that behavior." As he spoke, the atmosphere in the room physically changed. A low, mournful sound came from outside, the wind picking up, howling around the corners of the lodge. The staff, moving like ghosts on the perimeter, had begun to dim the main antler chandeliers, shifting the light from a bright, festive glare to a low, intimate, almost sacred glow. The dining room, once a courtroom, now felt like a chapel, hushed and heavy, waiting for the final vows. My grandfather, Rutherford Hale, picked up his full wineglass. The entire table tensed. This was it, the pronouncement. He raised the glass high, his arms steady. He opened his mouth, and then he stopped. He looked down the table, his eyes finding mine. He lowered the glass, setting it back on the table, untouched. "In a moment," he said, to no one in particular. The tension, held for so long, threatened to snap. He was drawing it out. He was waiting for one last thing. I understood. The confessions were not the end. The confessions were just the clearing of the board. The game was not over. I looked at the empty chair beside me, the one my mother had been so afraid of, the one my grandfather had set as a test, the one I had placed the tulips on. In this new, chapel-like quiet, I reached over and picked up the small crystal vase. I held it for a second, then gently placed it directly in the center of the empty place setting. "You're right, Grandfather," I said, my voice clear in the hush. "It's not about confessions, it's about what happens next." I looked at my family, at their exhausted, expectant faces. This chair isn't empty. It's an opportunity. It's for whoever is willing to step forward, for whoever is willing to show up. My words hung in the air, a different kind of challenge, an invitation. And in that precise, critical moment of silence, my phone, sitting in my lap, vibrated. It was not a loud buzz, but in the stillness, it felt like a gunshot. I did not move. I waited. It buzzed again. A text. I slid it carefully from my lap, under the table. I angled the screen. It was from Sarah, my colleague at Beacon, my digital tripwire. The message was not Alpine Green. It was a crisis alert. "Quinn, trouble. We just got a flag. An anonymous email. Sent 20 minutes ago to the Boston Globe, the local Wyoming press. and two of our largest foundation donors. The sender claims to have internal documents proving you are misusing beacon funds for personal gain. It's Vivian's rumor, weaponized and anonymous. It's an attack on the lab. They are trying to destroy you. What are your orders? I read the message twice, the final piece. The ambush Marley had fumbled was amateur hour, the real professional attack, the one designed not just to humiliate me but to destroy my work, my credibility, my entire life, had just been launched. They had missed me at the dinner, so they were trying to burn down my world from the outside. I looked up from the phone. My grandfather was watching me, his eyes sharp. He had seen the phone. He had seen the shift in my expression. A slow smile spread across my face. It was not a smile of humor. It was a smile of absolute, cold clarity. They had finally shown their full hand. They had made their last move. And they had no idea that I had the Hale family charter, my grandmother's letter, and a real-time, fully audited transparency dashboard sitting in my pocket. It's now, I whispered to myself, or it's never. I placed the phone on the table, face up, for all to see. I looked at my grandfather. Now, grandfather, I said, I believe it's time. I stood up. The movement was slow, measured. Every eye in that hushed, warm room snapped to me. My father started to say my name, a half-formed protest, but I was already moving. Arlo, I said, my voice cutting through the thick, emotional atmosphere. I apologize. I need your projector. Arlo Dwyer, a man who recognized a change in legal strategy when he saw one, did not question me. He simply nodded and gestured to the HDMI cable connected to his tablet. Be my guest. I walked to the side table, retrieved my laptop from my bag, and plugged it in. The small click of the cable locking into its port sounded as loud as a gunshot in the silent room. The large screen at the end of the room, which had moments ago been a source of humiliation, flickered from black to the cool blue of my desktop. It was an image of the Boston skyline, clean, orderly, and impersonal. I just received a message, I announced to the room. My voice was amplified by the system Arlo still controlled. It seems that just a few minutes ago, an anonymous email was sent to the Boston Globe, the Jackson Hole Gazette, and, most critically, to the board of directors for the Hale Foundation and two of our largest private donors at Beacon. I saw Aunt Vivian's head come up, her eyes bright with a sudden, reptilian interest. Marley looked up, confused. This was not her plot. This email, I continued, my fingers moving over the trackpad, alleges, with great certainty, that I have been misusing Beacon funds for personal PR, that I am financially corrupt, and that the Civic Impact Laureate was a purchased honor. A wave of shocked murmurs rolled through the room. This was an escalation far beyond a family spat. This was an attempt to destroy my career. I've spent my life, I said, believing in two things, public value and absolute transparency. So, let's be transparent. I opened a file. It was not a slideshow. It was the offline backup of the Beacon Lab's entire financial system. This is our immutable audit log, I said, my voice the same even, informative tone I used for boardroom presentations. Every dollar in, every dollar out. As you can see, our administrative overhead is tracked in real time. It is 1.9%. Our marketing budget, which Aunt Vivian was so concerned about earlier, is 0.8%. And as you can see from the line item expenditures, it is allocated entirely for community outreach pamphlets in rural clinics, not, I added, my eyes finding hers, for personal branding. Vivian's face tightened. But the allegation is specific, I continued, and I take it very seriously. It claims I used my field deployments to funnel money. I clicked, and the screen split. On the left, you see the signed invoices for our New Mexico deployment, every vendor, every timestamp. On the right, this is the corresponding surveillance footage from the warehouse we were using in Gallup, timestamped at 2 a.m, showing the distribution of medical supplies to the Navajo Nation Clinic. That's me, I said, pointing to a small, blurry figure in a parka. Counting crates. I clicked again, Here is South Dakota, the invoices for the backup generators for the Rosebud Clinic, and here, I played another video, is the installation team's final check, with me signing off. My work is data, my defense is data, it is verifiable, it is absolute, and it is clean. I let the video of the generator whirring to life in the snow play for a long, silent moment. And now, I said, we come to the anonymous email itself. Arlo Dwyer stepped forward, as if on cue. He looked at his tablet. Mr. Hale, he said, anticipated that those who failed to win an argument with manufactured drama might escalate to manufactured crimes. We have been monitoring the lodge's network activity for the past 2 hours. A new, colder fear entered the room. The email in question, Arlo said, his voice flat, was sent at 9:47 p.m. Mountain Time. It was sent from a newly created, encrypted Proton Mail account. However, the originating IP address, he paused, is firewalled to this estate. It traces to a hardline connection in the secondary building. He looked up from his tablet, his eyes scanning the faces of the younger cousins, until he found his target. The family warehouse, Arlo stated, where you, Derek, have your gaming set up. Derek, my cousin, made a high, wheezing sound, like a dying balloon. He looked like he had been shot. His eyes, wide with panic, flew to his mother. I, he stammered, his hands flapping uselessly. Mom said. She said Quinn was ruining the family. She said I had to protect us. She gave me the letter to send. Aunt Vivian looked as if Arlo had physically struck her. You pathetic little idiot, she hissed, her mask of civility completely incinerated. You were supposed to use the library VPN. You were supposed to. She stopped, realizing what she had just confessed. The room, which had been frozen, now erupted. The silent, passive relatives who had been recording the drama on their phones, the ones who had been enjoying the show, now looked horrified. This was not a family fight. This was a federal crime, wire fraud, libel. They looked down, one by one. I heard the quiet, definitive clicks of phone cases being closed, of devices being slid back into pockets and purses. The show was over. The audience was complicit. Marley, to her credit, was not part of it. She had been trying to win a battle for succession. Vivian had been trying to start a war. My sister just sank lower in her chair, covering her entire face with both hands, her shoulders shaking. I don't want this, I said, and my voice, though quiet, silenced the room. I turned off the projector. The screen went black, returning the room to the intimate, chapel-like glow of the dimmed chandeliers. I looked at Derek, who was crying, at Vivian, who was trembling with a rage that had nowhere to go, at my mother, who was just staring. I did not come here to destroy anyone, I said, and I meant it. This isn't a victory. This is a sickness. We are a family, and we are using anonymous emails and secret recordings and financial sabotage to… What? To measure our love? To prove our loyalty? I shook my head. My entire life, I have been invisible to this family, and I have learned that I prefer my honest invisibility to this toxic, desperate, poisoned visibility. I do not want to win this fight. I just want this fight to stop. I want us to stop using lies to measure our worth. My grandfather's voice, when it came, was a low rumble. He did not stand. He spoke to his children, to my mother, my aunts, my uncles. You have heard her, he said. You have seen what she builds, and you have seen what you have built, he gestured. A sweeping, dismissive hand that encompassed Vivian, Derek, and Marley. You sit in this house, a house built on my work, and you teach your children that blood gives them the right to smear, that legacy is a weapon, that the correct response to another's success is not pride, but conspiracy. He looked at my mother. Elaine, is this what you are teaching them? My mother stood up. Her face was a ruin. The tears were gone. She was just… Empty. She looked at her father. She looked at her sister-in-law, Vivian, with a look of profound, dawning horror, and then she looked at me. "I'm sorry," she whispered. And it was not a performance. It was not a defense. It was not an excuse. It was the first, undefended, truly honest thing I had ever heard her say. She did not say what she was sorry for. She did not have to. She was sorry for all of it. For the wall, for the noise, for the poison. I held her gaze, and for the first time, I saw the terrified, insecure girl from Flagstaff that she had always been. I nodded, just once. I turned back to the table. "If this was just a Thanksgiving dinner," I said, my voice clear and final. "We have failed. If this was a test, I hope we have all learned something. But if this," I looked at my grandfather, "was a recognition ceremony, a ceremony to finally see what is real." I straightened my shoulders. Then I choose to be here. I choose to show up. The room was still. The confessions were done. The evidence was presented. The trial was over. And then Rutherford Hale stood up. He did not push his chair back. He just rose, a pillar of quiet, absolute authority at the head of the table. 30 people stopped breathing. He picked up his full, untouched glass of red wine. The sound of the crystal stem lifting from the polished wood was the only sound in the world. He scanned the table, his eyes moving slowly over each face, over Blevins, over Vivian, who was staring at her plate, over his daughter, my mother, who was still standing, exposed and ashamed, over my father, who looked 1,000 years old, over Marley, who was still hiding her face. His gaze continued down the length of the table, past the aunts and uncles, past the cousins. And then he stopped. His eyes, bright as polished steel, locked on mine. His gaze was locked on mine. A circuit closed across the long, wreckage-strewn table. The air was thin, every molecule of oxygen seemingly consumed by the drama, the confessions, and the silence. He held his glass high, the red wine a dark jewel in the low, chapel-like light. "We have," he began, his voice not loud, but amplified by the system that had, until now, been a weapon. "A habit in this family of toasting shadows. We toast wealth, which is paper. We toast connections, which are vapor. We toast blood, which is an accident." He paused, and his eyes moved for a second, taking in his children, his grandchildren, the entire nervous, captive audience. "Tonight," he said, his voice gaining a strength that belied his age, "we toast substance. We toast the real. We toast the ones who do not wait for an invitation." He raised the glass higher, a final declaration. "To real family, not the ones who share your name, but the ones who share your values, the ones who show up when the lights are off, when the cameras are gone, and when the work is hard, the ones," his eyes found mine again, "who bring their own chair." And then he pointed, a single, steady, unshakable finger aimed down the polished length of the table, at me. "Tonight," he declared, his voice ringing with the force of a gavel, "I am activating Article 4 of the Hale Family Charter, the Real Family Clause." He did not need to look at his lawyer. He knew the words. He had written them with my grandmother. "The controlling voting rights of the Hale Foundation," he announced, "and the total ethical veto power over all new capital ventures of Hale Logistics will be transferred, effective immediately." He took a final, steadying breath. "They will be placed in the stewardship of Quinn Halbrook for an initial term of 5 years." The silence did not just break, it detonated. It was a shockwave of disbelief. My Uncle Blevins made a sound like he had been punched. Aunt Vivian, who had been exposed as a criminal, looked up, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. My mother simply closed her eyes, as if the words were a physical weight she was finally accepting. "No!" The shriek was animal, Marley. She was on her feet, her chair knocked back, her face streaked with tears and fury. You can't just Just give it all to her. I am your granddaughter. We are your family. I protest. I protest." She was hysterical, looking around the room, expecting someone, anyone, to join her. No one did. My grandfather did not even raise his voice. He kept his glass held high, his eyes still fixed on me, a conduit of power being visibly transferred. "The time for protests with microphones is over, Marley," he said, his voice cutting through her hysteria with chilling, surgical calm. "If you wish to protest, you may do so with your behavior. You may do so by showing up. Until then, you will sit down." The absolute authority in his voice was a wall she could not scale. Her protest died. Collapsing into a ragged, choking sob, she fell back into her chair, a puppet with its strings cut. "Arlo," my grandfather said. The lawyer stood, all business. He opened the mahogany box. He did not retrieve the charter. He retrieved a stack of papers, thick and legal, and one small, cream-colored envelope. "The proxy documents activating the clause," Arlo announced to the table, "were signed by Mr. Hale 6 months ago. Contingent on tonight's verification of behavioral criteria, they are legal, binding, and have already been filed with our counsel in Delaware. This is done." He then held up the small envelope. A final addendum was attached, from June Hale's personal archive, a note, to be read upon activation. He opened it and read my grandmother's firm, elegant script. "Do not just give her a seat at the old table. Rutherford, it is not worthy of her. Let her build a new one, and tell her this: set a chair where others only stand." My grandmother's voice, her final instruction, echoed across the years. She had not just seen me, she had paved the way for me. "However," Arlo continued, his voice shifting, "Mr. Hale is not a man of punishments. He is a man of systems. He is not disinheriting anyone from the family. He is merely disinheriting you from unearned power." He clicked a button, and the projector, which had shown my evidence, now showed a simple, clean flowchart. It was titled, "The Hale Family Commitment Path." "Effective immediately," Arlo explained. "Any family member, including those at this table, is eligible for foundation partnership. The pathway is not complex. It requires 200 documented hours of public service per year at an institution approved by the new chair, no press, no PR, boots on the ground work." He pointed to the last box in the flowchart. "Upon successful, verified completion of 1 year, the foundation will establish a new, dedicated co-fund in that family member's name. This fund will be matched, dollar for dollar, for a charitable purpose of your choosing, to be administered and supervised by Ms. Quinn Halbrook." He had done it. My grandfather, he was a ruthless, brilliant strategist. He had not locked them out. He had locked them in. He had created a path to redemption, but the gatekeeper was me. The toll was the very work they had always refused to do. He was forcing them to learn my language, to understand my values, to show up. The room was silent, the weight of this new reality settling on them. All eyes, one by one, turned to me. They were waiting for my victory speech, my condemnation, my final, triumphant twist of the knife. I looked at the faces, my father's, exhausted, my mother's, ashamed, but, for the first time, not afraid, and Marley's. She was still crying, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking. She was not a villain. She was just a girl who had been so blinded by the spotlight. She had forgotten how to see in the dark. I felt no triumph, just the crushing, cold, heavy weight of the work to come. I stood up. I did not walk to the head of the table. I walked down the side, past the uncles and aunts, until I stood behind my sister's chair. I did not touch her. I just spoke, my voice quiet, for her ears only. "Marley." She flinched, her sobs catching in her throat. She refused to look at me. "If you want to," I said, my voice low and steady, "we can start on Monday, 8 a.m. The Riverton Community Food Bank needs volunteers to sort intake for the winter. The work is hard. It is cold, and it smells like onions. She slowly, tentatively, lifted her head. Her face was a ruin of mascara and confusion. What? What did you say? 8 a.m., I repeated. I will be there. The offer is on the table. But, Marley, I leaned a little closer. You come alone. No phone, no camera. You come to work. That is the only way this starts. She stared at me, her mind utterly unable to process an offer that was not also an attack. She just stared. I left her there, the choice now hers. I walked back to my place. As I passed my parents, my mother looked up at me. Her face was hollowed out by shame, but as our eyes met, I saw something new. I saw relief. The decades-long performance was over. She had been exposed, and she had survived. Thank you, she whispered. It was not an apology. It was gratitude. My father met my gaze. His hand, which had been clenched into a white-knuckled fist on the table, was shaking. He slowly, painfully, uncurled his fingers. He turned his hand over, his palm facing up. It was not a plea. It was not an offering. It was just an opening, a space. He nodded. Once. My grandfather had watched this entire exchange. He, too, nodded. He was satisfied. Arlo, he commanded. Turn off the cameras. Sir? Arlo asked, gesturing to the live stream feed that had been broadcasting this entire execution. All of them, Rutherford said. The stream, the internal security, turn it all off. The performance is over. Real families, he said, his gaze sweeping the table. Learn how to listen in the silence. Arlo hit a switch. The small, malevolent red recording light on the camera in the corner went dark. We were, for the first time, truly alone. Now, my grandfather said. He lifted his glass again. To the Hale family, the real one, the one that starts building, now. He drank. Slowly, hesitantly, one by one. Other glasses were lifted. My father, his hand trembling, raised his. My mother, even Marley, her face raw and tear-streaked, lifted her water goblet. A few hesitant, fragile clinks of crystal. I looked at the empty chair beside me, the one my mother had feared, the one my grandfather had set. The vase of white tulips sat in its center, a bright, silent testament. Rutherford saw me looking. Leave it, he said, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. We always leave it, for whoever comes next, for the one who shows up. The great clock in the hall began to chime. Midnight. Thanksgiving was over. Outside the massive windows, the snow was falling thick and fast, a clean white blanket covering the mountain, burying the old soiled tracks, leaving a fresh, unmarked path forward. At my end of the table, my hand, which had been resting in my lap, closed around a small, worn object, the leather-bound journal my grandmother June had given me. For my entire life, I had used it to hide, to write down the voice I was not allowed to have. I ran my thumb over the scarred leather. I did not need to hide in its pages anymore. The night had not ended with a punishment, or even a victory. It had ended with a promise. From this night on, in this family, we would not measure our worth in noise, or in blood, or in applause. We would measure it in presence. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please comment below and let us know where you are listening from. We would love to connect and share our thoughts. Remember to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and give us extra support by hitting that hype button to help this story be heard by more people.